Hey everyone, this is Seth Parnell, minister of the Portia Church of Christ, and this is episode 108 of the Midweek Bible Study. Hope that you are doing well. Hope everything is good, is going your way. We have the 4th of July coming up pretty soon, and so I hope that you're going to be enjoying the holiday that's coming up, and being able to maybe celebrate with some of your family and rejoice about some of the good things that we have. We live in a great country. We live in a country where we have a lot to be thankful for, and so it's always good to celebrate that when we have the chance. But we hope you have a good time, because I think that'll be the 4th is it's before next Thursday, so yeah, it'll happen before we meet again, and so hope you have a wonderful holiday weekend. We always want to let you know that we are open to questions and to suggestions and to requests for passages or topics. If you ever need to submit you one of those, and please feel free to do so. Please feel free to send them our way. We would love to hear from you and love to hear what you have to say and what you think about it, and if we can do anything to help you. I had a monitor, go out, and so I have a little different setup here tonight, and so it's going to be a little bit different, but hopefully we'll be back to normal next week, and we'll have all this sorted out. But we also want to give you an invitation if you're someone that is in the Portia area. We are located at 307 South Jackson Street in Portia, Arkansas. Right now, we are worshiping at 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock on Sunday morning, and 5 o'clock on Sunday night, and 6 o'clock on Wednesday night. And so if you're in the area, we would love to see you. We'd love to fellowship with you and get to know you, talk to you, and be able to worship with you. Those are all good things, and we would love to have you visit us there at Portia. So if you're in the area, I hope you can take the opportunity in order to take advantage of that. Also, this is our first time back after our summer break, after our 2-week break that we usually take in the summer. And so it's good to be back. It's good to get back in the swing of things. We had a church camp over at Green Valley a couple weeks ago. And we had a wonderful time out there. We studied the book of Philippians and studying about the happiest people on earth. As Christians, especially when you read throughout the book of Philippians, there's a lot that the Apostle Paul has to say concerning joy and concerning how the Philippians were a cause of joy for him, and that he was looking forward to the joy that he could receive from God through the promises that he had given. And there was a wonderful week. We had 13 baptisms throughout the week, which is certainly something to rejoice with. And so I think we had a lot of good lessons, a lot of good ground covered, and we had 13 new brothers and sisters in Christ, and so that's a week well spent in my eyes. And then when we took we'll always take 2 weeks off, and so we took the last week off as well, and so it's good to be back here tonight. And this will probably be a shorter episode, but I'm sure there's a lot of good that we can take a look at our passage with tonight, because we're going to be in Joshua chapter 10. Joshua chapter 10. We're going to take a look at a passage that we find here, and something that is pretty remarkable when you think about some of the events that transpire, especially in the Old Testament. I mean, there's some in the New Testament as well, but in the Old Testament, there's some events that take place that, when you try to imagine them, when you try to think about them, they seem so cinematic, or they seem so big, so large, that sometimes it's hard to fully grasp, just how just what it was like, to see those things and to see, just how these events, transpired. And you think of the parting of the Red Sea, and what it was like in order to walk through, the sea on dry land with walls of water, on each side, and how you were trusting in God to keep those walls of water in their place, or you were going to be a goner. You think about events that the children of Israel went through. You think of the 10 plagues and what they experienced, in that case. There's so many events that you can see throughout the Old Testament that speak to the power of God and speak to his deliverance and his ability in order to make an impact on this world and make an impact on his people. And it's certainly one of the lessons that we get from the Old Testament. But if we take a look here at Joshua chapter 10, we're going to, this is the beginning of this story. We're going to kind of take a look at the kind of the end of the story, but we're going to introduce it here as well, here in Joshua chapter 10. It says, as soon as Adonai-Zedek, the king of Jerusalem, heard how Joshua had captured Ai and had devoted it to destruction, doing to Ai and its king as he had done to Jericho and its king, and how the inhabitants of Gibeon had made peace with Israel and were among them, he feared greatly, because Gibeon was a great city, like one of the royal cities, and because it was greater than Ai, and all its men were warriors. And so this man, Adonai-Zedek, who is the king of Jerusalem, he's going to send a letter to all of his buddies, all of his fellow kings in his area, and he's going to get a big, kind of a big alliance and a big army made up of all these different kings, and they're going to try to fight back against Israel and fight back against, who they are, and try to maybe defend themselves from this, what they saw as a coming threat. It wasn't just Israel, but they had heard how Gibeon had made peace with them, and how they were now kind of in alliance with Israel as well. And so that was a concern for them as well, because as it says, the city of Gibeon, was a pretty big city. It was a pretty prominent city in the area. It says it has a lot of warriors, a lot of strong people in order to fight for it, and it went over to the side of Israel, and made peace with them. And so he's a little bit anxious in this case, and so he sends a letter to all of his buddies, and he is going to form this alliance and go and fight against Gibeon first. They're going to try to fight against Gibeon. And to get kind of a little bit of a backstory here, we know that Israel was, Moses delivered Israel, through the power of God, from the land of Egypt. They were able to exit Egypt and wander to the promised land. It took a very circuitous route because of the disobedience and the lack of faith of Israel. They had to wander in the wilderness for 40 years, just because they did not believe in the power of God, that he could deliver them, from the might of the people of the promised land. And so, but they finally get the green light. They finally get the okay in order to venture into the Canaan land and to the land that they were going to inherit, the land that had been promised, to their ancestors. And so they are going through the process of kind of claiming this land for their own. If you go back a couple of chapters to, we have the very famous story of Joshua fighting the battle of Jericho, and how God gave him specific instructions in order to fight that battle. It was something that was unusual. It was something that was not the typical strategy for a victory at that time, but yet it was something that God gave Joshua to do. Joshua followed it, and Israel was able to obtain victory. And so they're going through this process of claiming this land for their own, and so they're going to have to fight a lot of battles in order to accomplish that. And if you go back to verse 9 here in Joshua, this is a story where we find how Gibeon makes peace with Israel, and they do it in a pretty deceitful way. It's not something that's totally above board, but yet they kind of put on a show for Israel. They kind of dress themselves up in worn out clothes and things of that sort, And to make it look like they were just traveling from a long journey. They were travelers from a very far away place, when in reality they just lived, down the road. But Israel didn't know any better, and so when they saw these people and they said they were travelers, they made peace with them, and they swore an oath to them. And later, when they found out that they had tricked them, they were in a pretty tight spot. But Gibeon was still, one of their allies. It's good to see Kathy here. I hope everything is going well for you. Hope you're having a good day. It's always good to have you here tonight. And it's but these Gibeonites were people that were going to be with Israel for a while. And so when Gibeon comes under attack by this entire alliance of these multiple kings, the king of Jerusalem and the king of the Amorites, all these kings are going to come up against Gibeon, and so Israel marches in order to fight alongside them. And if you get down to verse, I believe it's in verse 6. Yeah, you go down to verse 6 and verse 7. Joshua, he kind of instigates this this attack, and he comes up against them, and he leads Israel in the defense of Gibeon. And you might think it's kind of maybe a little bit hard for them in order to defend someone who had just tricked them, had just deceived them. It's never fun to be lied to. It's never fun to be deceived or anything of that sort. We always look at that as a very negative experience when that is done to us. We don't like to be deceived or lied to. And this was the case with Gibeon and Israel. The Gibeonites had straight up lied to the face of Israel, and had gone to great lengths in order to deceive them. And now they are asking Israel for help because they are getting attacked. But what does Joshua do in this case? What is he called to do, in this case, since they had made this promise, to Gibeon, whether it was built on deceit or not, they had made this promise. And so, what is Joshua going to do? Well, we'll find that he's someone who will continue to fight, for he'll continue to fight for these people. In verse 6, it says, "And the men of Gibeon sent to Joshua at the camp in Gilgal, saying, 'Do not relax your hand from your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us, and help us, for all the kings of the Amorites who dwell in the hill country are gathered against us.' So Joshua went up from Gilgal, he and all the people of war with him, and all the mighty men of valor. And the Lord said to Joshua, 'Do not fear them, for I have given them into your hands. Not a man of them shall stand before you.' And so Joshua came upon them suddenly, having marched up all night from Gilgal. And the Lord threw them into a panic before Israel, who struck them with a great blow at Gibeon. And he chased them by the way of the ascent of Beth-horon, and struck them as far as Azekah and Makkedah." And so we find this case here in which Joshua, I find it interesting that it says that he marched all night. Not only was he someone that was willing to come to the aid of these Gibeonites, but yet he was someone who went to great lengths in order to keep this promise. It says that he marched all night and came upon them suddenly, and then fought this battle. It's one thing in order to fight a battle that was as extraneous and something that was as stressful as a battle in that point in history was. But to march all night, to travel that far and then fight a battle at the end of that, that's pretty impressive. And that's what these Israelites did. And it wasn't necessarily to save their own people or to do something of that sort, but yet it's to save these Gibeonites who had lied to them and who had deceived them. There'd probably be a lot of people who would say, well, these Gibeonites, they deserve it. They deserve what they're getting because they lied to us and because they deceived us in that manner. But yet, Joshua didn't see it that way. He was someone that was going to honor his promise, no matter what. And so we can kind of see the value in which he places here on honoring a promise that you have made, honoring a commitment, that you have made. There is great value in someone who goes to great lengths in order to uphold a commitment that they have to put forth. And that's one of the reasons why Jesus kind of gives the caution against making oaths or swearing, which was a not swearing in the sense of saying a cuss word, but swearing as far as making an oath or making a promise, which was a custom that they did at that time. He says, don't go about doing those things because you're going to be held accountable for keeping them, but rather you let your yes be yes and your no be no. If you're someone who's going to make a promise, then you better be dedicated and to keeping it, or else we're going to be found guilty of breaking that. And so there's a lot of value that we can see in someone who keeps their promises and keeps their commitments. But also we can see that Joshua didn't try to play a judge in this case. He wasn't someone that kind of said, well, we made this promise, but these Gibeonites, they're not good people. They're deceitful, and so I think we're just going to kind of back off from this. Joshua didn't try to judge these people in there, but he saw the situation. He said, I've made you this commitment, and I'm going to honor it. And he's going to serve these people. He's going to help these people, whether in their mind they deserved it or not. And that's kind of a model that we have as Christians today. We're someone who's called to serve people. We're called to help people, to aid people, without determining whether they're good enough for that, without determining whether they're moral enough for that. That's not our position to judge that. That's not our role to play in this. But sometimes we help people that are pretty far away from the gospel, that they may not care about spiritual things, but yet we help them because we are told that we are to love people and to love them deeply. We're to love our neighbor as ourselves. We show love to our brothers and sisters in Christ, but we also show love to the people who are outside of the church. Because if we can't show love to people that are outside of the church, then how's that going to shape their opinion of the church and their opinion of Jesus? If this is how his children, if that's how his followers act, why do I want to be a part of him? That's a tough question. That's a really tough question to ask yourself, and one that we have to face as we go forward as individuals and as the church as well. And so we always have to be someone who is willing to put forth that service, willing to put forth that love to people without playing that role of judge. And that doesn't mean as we always have to preface when we talk about these things, that doesn't mean that we don't hold people accountable for sin. Paul talks about this in 1 Corinthians, in which tolerating sin is not something that a Christian should celebrate. But yeah, it's not we're not someone who determines whether someone is quote good enough in order to help. But we help people in all circumstances, in all places in life, and that's something that we're called to do as Christians. But as we see here, that Joshua, he continued on with this, and he fought this battle, and God gave him a great victory. He gave him a tremendous victory in this case, in which this was a pretty sizable army. There's 5 or 6 kings here that have combined their forces, and so this is quite a sizable army. And yet it says that he hit them with a great blow, that Joshua had a great victory in this case. But even though they were fighting well, even though they were doing some great things, it wasn't enough. And so if you go down here down to verse, here it is, down to verse 11, where it says, "And as they fled before Israel while they were going down the ascent of Beth Horon, the Lord threw down large stones from heaven on them as far as Azekah, and they died. And there were more who died because of the hailstones than the sons of Israel killed with the sword. And at that time Joshua spoke to the Lord in the day, and in that day when the Lord gave the Amorites over to the sons of Israel. And he said in the sight of Israel, Sun, stand still at Gibeon, and the moon in the valley of Ajalon. And the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, until the nation took vengeance on their enemies. Is this not written in the book of Jasher? The sun stopped in the midst of heaven, and did not hurry to set about for a whole day. There has been no day like it before or since, when the Lord heeded the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel. And so Joshua returned, and all Israel with him, to camp at Gilgal." And so we see that not only did Joshua, fight, this battle because he was keeping, a promise that Israel made, but God was with him in this case and gave him great victory. It says that God, threw down hailstones from heaven, on this fleeing army, and that was something that killed more of the enemy than the entirety of what Israel did, which was pretty significant when you consider, how long this battle lasted. This was a tremendous victory, for Israel, and God was someone who was there to do something, quite spectacular. But even though He caused these hailstones to fall down from heaven and to cause this great destruction upon their enemies, to give Israel this victory, He still wasn't done there. Joshua looked at the situation and he saw that it was going to be nighttime before Israel could, make a, finish off, their enemy. Their enemy was going to regroup, and come back again. And so he pleads to God. He says, let the sun stand still, and the moon in the valley of Ajalon. And God listened to him in that case. And the sun, stood still. And they were able to finish off, their enemies in that case. First off, when you think about this, what else, in this world? What else in this world would have the absolute power in order to stop, the sun? And we know that most likely the Earth may have stopped, rotating. That there's a lot of scientific, theories out there that you could go into, which I've looked into. Excuse me. A lot of them are pretty fascinating to figure out, just how this happened. But who else can do that? Who else can make that happen but the God in heaven, the God that we serve, the God who is almighty. He is the only one who could make something like this, something on this grand of scale, happen. But yet He was able, to do it. There's nothing else in this world could do something that great. You remember when we started out, we talked about some of those grand things that happened in the Old Testament that kind of, you wonder what it must have been like in order to witness that firsthand. This was be something, spectacular. As the day went on, you would know that, the sun was supposed to set, but yet the sun didn't set. And, I think it was, it says that the sun stopped in the midst of heaven and did not hurry to set for about a whole day. And so it was about a whole day, in that case, in which the sun, did not set. And so they were able to do these things because God, was with them. When we're someone who pursues, what is good, when we pursue, obedience to God's word, God is going to be with us, and He's going to be someone that's there that is going to help and fight for us. It doesn't mean we're always going to get, everything that we want. It doesn't mean things are always going to turn out the way that we think they should be. But we know that God will be someone who will be there, to fight, for us. And Joshua was someone who, like I said, he was, keeping his integrity. He was honoring the promises that they made, and God was with him. And so we serve a great and powerful God, someone who can do these things and make these things happen. And it's comforting to me to think about, just how if he can do these things, that we read about, in the Bible, what the future is going to be like. Well, if he done these things in the past, what can he do, in the future? And that's a very comforting and a very exciting thing to think about, because as Christians, it's not just about finding comfort. It's not just about finding freedom from the pains of this world. But I think there's excitement in being a Christian about what God has in store for us in the future and what that's going to be like. It's definitely something that should excite us, should give us joy, and should give us a hopeful perspective of the future. But that's our brief look here at Joshua chapter 10. We'll probably call it right there, but we appreciate everyone being here tonight, and whether you watch it with us live here or whether you watch it later on with the replay. We always appreciate your presence and your willingness to study God's Word, and we'll hope you'll join us next week for another episode of the midweek Bible study. We will have some guests coming in the next couple of weeks, and so hopefully, I know you'll enjoy what they have to say, and we're willing to grow alongside with us as we always seek to grow closer to God in everything that we do. And so with that being said, I hope you go out and be the light of the world. Hope you go out and glorify God in everything that you do. And we'll catch you next time.